What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Shuggy from Shook Earth Media, and today we're talking about video games. We're talking about linear versus open world and why I tend to prefer linear games. Now, this doesn't mean that I have an issue with open world games. There's many that I like very much. I played all the Elder Scrolls games. I've played the Fallout games. I like open world as well, but that's for another video. But in general, I tend to prefer linear games. And now this is because, in general, there is much more polish to a linear game. There is much more variety in environments. You will tend to see areas that are designed to be memorable and be different from what came before it by controlling how you progress through the game in such a strict manner. They can escalate the game in such a way that they know exactly everything you've done before that. So each area you get to build on your skills. It gets progressively more difficult. It ebbs and flows in an interesting way, and they make sure to make every area as memorable as possible. I also tend to prefer that these stories in linear games can go a bit more in depth, even though there's more of world building, there's a much bigger breadth to the story, there's a lot more little stories. I would say open world is very wide, but very shallow. So you don't get to go that deep into any one particular story, whereas with a linear game, like Silent Hill or something like that, like Silent Hill 2, you can go really deep into one character's psychology, and you can have an interesting story that builds on itself, and you don't necessarily have stories that deep in an open world game, because an individual quest line is not going to have as much polish to it as a level or a section of a linear game. So then I would actually say my favorites tend to be games that almost combine the two, because I like to explore, and I like every area that I explore to be unique and to have all these hidden nooks and crannies in them, and not have the same copy-pasted textures all over the place that you will see in games like Elder Scrolls and Fallout. As much as I like those games, you see a lot of the same stuff. Once you've played the game for a handful of hours, you've seen most of the areas you're going to see. And it's just simple variations on what you've already seen before. Now, there's nothing particularly wrong with that, because you get a lot more replayability out of it. There's much more, expansive areas, and there is a bunch of hidden goodies to find. But what I prefer is a game like Bioshock, where you're given a whole level to explore, and each and every area of that is unique and interesting, and you can find all the little nooks and crannies. I obsess over finding all the collectibles and all of the little story bits. I want to know every little thing that I can. I like how the environment tells the story without even dialogue or anything like that. You're just looking around and it tells you everything you need to know. And you don't necessarily get that level of attention to detail in an open world game, because there's so much content in this game. There's not enough time in the developer's life. They're making these games in 4 years worth, 5 years worth, 6 years worth sometimes. But you don't have that amount of time in 6 years to put as much detail as in one Bioshock level. Because they produce a Bioshock game, a linear game, in the same amount of time as they would develop an open world game. Maybe open world game is a bit longer, but they can't be taking a decade to make an open world game, because the standards 10 years into a project in the industry is going to be vastly different than it was when it started. You see, there's 10-year projects like Alan Wake, which actually started as an open world game, by the way, It was an open world game originally when it started development around the year 2000, and then it doesn't come out until 2010, and they vastly change how the game is laid out, and they make it into a linear storytelling driven game because they realized that that was the strong suit of Alan Wake, was the story, was the gripping, thrilling, scary stuff that you experience when you're playing it, the action scenes and all that. Now, in an open world where you can explore it at your own pace and you're not on the rails of the story, you can put off the story indefinitely and it would feel like it's not really all that urgent. And this is why some of the stories in open world games just don't have that same intensity to them, is because, oh, we're saving the world, but I'm going to do it later, though. And I'm going to do these, like, I'm going to find somebody's lost puppy in the meantime. It's just like, you put off this supposedly big epic story for all these little trivial small things on the way, and it just doesn't have that same epic feeling. So yeah, I tend to like those games that give you an open level to explore, let you do it at your own pace, but you go from level to level, and the story itself is still on rails, but you do have an area to explore where there's a bunch of hidden goodies and collectibles and environmental storytelling, which I think is one of the strongest elements of video games storytelling as a whole, is being able to tell the story with the environment first and foremost. That is one of my favorite aspects of video games in general. I mean, you got the Half-Life series that tells you a story. They do have a script and they have characters and they have dialogue scenes, but some of the most significant revelations come in little bits that you pick up along the way. I mean, in Half-Life 1, one of the most memorable parts is when you encounter the military and you're like, oh, these are the good guys, they're here to help, and then they start shooting at you. There's no dialogue needed. It just, this environment tells a story. The fact that the military is not your savior, they are a threat, is a very important aspect of the story, and it changes the entire dynamic of the storytelling going forward. So when you get games like the Tomb Raider reboots that have that same open world-esque, but it's really attention to detail driven and collectible driven, and you find these little things along the way, and I really enjoy that. So it's a linear game with open world elements. When you combine the two, it really works for me, and I don't really enjoy seeing the repetition that you see in open world games quite as much. Okay, so now actually for an example, The Witcher 2, which was a fantastic game. I loved Witcher 3 as well. But The Witcher 2 had these open areas that you explore, but it was actually a linear game. You don't explore these open world areas with a lot of what I would call filler content, the question marks you find on the map and stuff like that. That's just kind of like, you get a reward for it in terms of loot, but it's only little tiny story bits that you get. And that can work in certain games, like Cyberpunk, for example. The little story bits that you get and the world building that you get is one of the best parts of it. And The Witcher, that is true as well, but in The Witcher 2, I almost preferred how the world was laid out. As much as The Witcher 3 has a lot that it does better as well. I prefer the combat, the storytelling is really great. But The Witcher 2, I do prefer that linear storytelling because I wasn't as driven to explore these question mark areas as I was to see every nook and cranny of these linear areas that you come across. So yeah, those are just some examples, guys, and why I, in general, tend to prefer linear games. Now, it doesn't always apply because Rockstar games have so much attention to detail. Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption, there's so much detail in those games. But those games are made by literally like hundreds, thousands of people, and they take so much time and resources. Not every company is able to do that. So, and even so, I find the gameplay in those games to be a little lacking. They're fairly simplistic. I mean, it's the attention to detail in the world and the writing that is really exceptional in those games. and that they have an attention to detail in them, and how the characters act and the acting, and there's an unparalleled presentation value, but it doesn't necessarily come across when it comes to the gameplay. So that's my thoughts on this, guys. And don't think that I don't like open world games, because I really do. I played the hell out of Cyberpunk, and that's a video for another day. That could be a fun review. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion. If you disagree or you agree, would love to hear you in the comments and hear your arguments why you like open world better. That'd be fun. So yeah, be sure to smash like, subscribe if you like this video, and I hope to see you on the next one. It's your boy Shuggy signing off.